Body Safety Australia acknowledges and pays respects to all traditional custodians and elders of this nation and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This podcast was recorded in Naarm on Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to The Kids Are Okay, your go-to podcast for making the hard chats easier. I'm Lauren French.
And I'm Deanne Carson.
And today is Reconciliation Week.
It is, and wow, talk about making the hard chats easier?
Question mark?
Yeah, question mark.
So this year's Reconciliation Week theme is Be a Voice for Generations. And while there's going to be lots of conversations around voice and platform and these sort of things in the next week and what everyone will be hearing about, we wanted to have this episode be just a really open, authentic conversation from my voice and Deanne's voice, and just to talk about the hard chats that come up when you're dealing with First Nations concerns and issues, when you're talking about First Nations people, when you're talking about living in Australia and all of the days and dates and weeks and things that come up with that, when you talk about teaching and being in schools. And we wanted to open up a window into how we have navigated that space over the past few years, how I have navigated the space and what has been really challenging and what has been really rewarding, and, you know, just trying to outline that so maybe, you know, for everyone listening, you can take that and make your chats that little bit easier.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this chat, but I also have to admit I'm a little bit nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this whole journey of being the CEO of Body Safety Australia, I have been nervous because I'm not a First Nations person. So who am I to talk about, you know, First Nations experiences? So in having this conversation with you, you know, obviously I want to hear about your experiences. But first, I want to tell you something I remember about you, and you might not remember this.
Oh, now I'm nervous.
You should be. When you sent your resume in, you were looking to do some volunteer work. You're like, yeah, I'm doing my master's in sexology. I really want to teach sex ed. I've had a look at your organisation. You know, just let me volunteer, right?
Just let me in.
Just let me in. And you sent your resume in and you had this amazing cover letter and you told us a lot about yourself. And one of the things that you told us was that you were Chinese, Indigenous, Japanese, Australian.
Mm-hmm.
And your use of commas wasn't that great, right? So I'm reading your resume going, Indigenous Japanese? That's really curious. Maybe I don't know enough about Japanese history to know about Indigenous Japanese people outside of Japanese. Okay,
this is just
off
to show
a good start.
Yeah, this is to show my terrible grammar that's clearly come about.
No, but, you know, obviously for you, you know, your background, your identity, your culture were really, really important, and it was something that was important that you brought to the organisation and continue to bring. But tell me about that. Tell me about being someone who was doing their masters, you now have masters in sexology, who wants to work in this field where, let's be honest, sex ed is white.
Yeah, and I think anytime you want to do anything in education, there's the acknowledgement that education is a colonised space and is a, you know, we all have our own personal reflections on education and how colonised and white and everything, the history and the space is. So anytime you want to be in an academic space, let alone in an academic space to learn how to be in a regular schooling space, you know, we often talk about the language that changes and the way you speak and the way you present yourself. And, you know, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of all of the small moments of racism, but there's a lot of but you don't sound Aboriginal, you sound so articulate and all those other lovely comments. And so I think it was a really interesting space to be learning about that. But I also know I've always been told that from a very young age, I would very proudly assert who I was, which would always surprise even my family, they would often talk to me as, you know, a 4-year-old going to kinder or going to school. I would walk up to someone I'd never met before and be like, "Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm Aboriginal, Chinese, Japanese, Australian." Like, I would just like say it, and like I would let everyone know. And no matter if they'd asked, to be clear.
Yeah.
But it's always been a very important part of who I am and the work that I do and where I want to be in. And for a lot of my, you know, younger years and early spaces of work, I'm from Darwin originally, and when I moved to Melbourne, it was very easy to work in spaces where my culture and who I wasn't at the forefront of what I was doing, because I was studying and I was working in hospo and I was doing all those sort of things. But I was also working in very white areas of Melbourne. And so I was called very exotic in the restaurants that I was working in. Exotic. I was complimented on my English. Also fun. And so, but because of that, it was a few years of a space where I was really personally getting really strong and confident in my identity. At my family, you know, we'd gone through a few spaces where we'd gotten more information and knowledge. We had reclaimed some knowledge and history of ours, which was really powerful. But that was all kind of personally happening, and my workspace really wasn't reflective of that. And so it wasn't until I'd finished my undergrad and I was looking at what career space do I want to be in that I realised that being authentic to me and my culture and my experience was paramount in having a positive workplace and a positive work life that I could enjoy.
When you say, you know, you talk about, like, you know, you're from Darwin and you were here in Melbourne, like, tell me, because, you know, obviously when I met you, I found your background, your story really compelling. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me, like, you know, when you say you're from Darwin, I assume that your mob are from Darwin, right?
Indeed, but no, which is often the assumption. And what I'd also say is, you know, we have deep connections with Larrakia mob, which is Darwin mob. So I grew up and my whole life was in Darwin, and my family's whole life was in Darwin. I grew up in the same house my mum grew up in, and we lived with my granddad, and, you know, huge amounts of intergenerational living, which is amazing. However, our mob is Kurrajari mob, which is near Broome, if you're unfamiliar. And the reason we don't have a huge amount of connection to Kurrajari mob in Broome is because of stolen generation history. So when we look back at that, my granddad's mum was taken from Broome area, lived on a mission, ended up in Darwin where she met her husband and where the family kind of continued. What this means is that we have deep connections to Larrakia mob and cultural understanding in Darwin. And when I'm talking about my mob and this sort of thing, I'm very aware that experience-wise has been Darwin focused, and yet my mob is very much not in Darwin, which is a very strange place to be in sometimes, though I want to be really clear, it's not a unique experience of Aboriginal people, is to be living on land that is not yours, to be from land that is not yours, and to never actually, you know, I've yet to step on my country.
Wow. And I think for me, I know that you were planning on going, and then COVID happened, and I kind of saw your grief in that.
We had a whole family thing planned of going, which was going to be really amazing, because when I was in school, as I said, I lived with my grandfather, and my eldest aunt was able to take my grandfather to Broome and to be on country and to see family before he passed, which was an amazing experience. And what was actually really amazing was because originally the family was split, so we do have family that's in Broome and on country, but we're obviously disconnected from them. But when my grandfather went there, there were people who came up to him and were like, "Oh, are you this person's family?"
Yeah, right.
Because they could just see it. Like like our family, one of my aunts was working down in kind of Alice and other areas, and there was someone who came up to her and went, "Oh, you Kurrajari mob, right?" Because just could tell from the face, from the look, sort of thing. And And so that's incredibly powerful, and I'm so glad that my grandfather got to do that, but a lot of us haven't been able to be there and organise that, and because of either COVID or travel or all of the things that happen. But it's really interesting being someone who's so committed to work in community and is really passionate about First Nations culture and, you know, work with mob, for mob and all of those things. And then I often have that reflection of, I'd really like this to be something I do at some point.
Yeah.
But we're not quite there yet.
Not yet. But I think you've raised a really interesting point, because you grew up on country but not your mob's country, and now you're in Melbourne, in Naarm, on Wurundjeri land, which is also not your land, and you are the only First Nations person in our organisation, and you work in a lot of Koori kindergartens. You go all over Victoria, and you work with First Nations children and their families and their communities, and yet it's another space that's not your land. Like, how is that for you?
And I love that you've highlighted that I'm the only First Nations person in the organisation, because I think sometimes when you hear it like that and when you state it, it can sound like a negative, that there's a moment of, oh, there's only one, and there's only, you know, it's only this small kind of box ticked kind of moment. However, it's very powerful how culturally safe I can feel here, even if I am only one in this space, which I think, and we'll talk a little bit later around the steps we've taken to make that happen, because I think it's very easy in spaces where if you're the only mob there, you know, you're on an island on your own in the middle of nowhere, and you can connect with everyone, but you are still distant from everyone. And so I think when I then go into really First Nations spaces like Koori Kinders, or I'm in a school in a First Nations community, there's a beautiful, often a really beautiful moment where, and this happens like any mob listening, you know that as soon as you meet mob, you just say, hey, where you from? And it's not asked in the racist way that is often asked. It is in are you my mob? And if not, I'm just trying to connect the mob that you're from. And often when I'm like, oh, I'm from Darwin, I'm Kurrajari mob, then I have people who can connect with me from Kurrajari mob or from Darwin mob.
Right, yeah.
And either way, even if they, you know, have never had a connection with either of those two things, there's an instant ability to connect on, we have similar stories. We're going to understand similar stuff. We can make comments to aunties and to, you know, language and to this sort of thing. And there's such an ease. I will instantly slip into my Darwin dialect, which we talk about, which I won't do right this second, but friends and people close to me will talk about when I'm in Darwin, when I'm with my mob, when I'm with family. You know, I will sound quite different. And we talk about code switching. We talk about, you know, white speak and black speak and this sort of thing. But I also, in those spaces, will feel safe enough to be that person, because I know I'm still viewed as an expert, as a professional, as someone who with something to offer, but I'm also viewed as someone who's created safety and connection. And, you know, I've had so many amazing little moments where, you know, not only do the children come up and say, hey, Arnie, and I'm just like flooded with love and trying not to cry because I'm like, oh my God, yes, I am Arnie. And those moments, just as much as I've had, you know, parents who can be open to me about who they are and the challenges they've faced, and the fact that they haven't even shared at the school that they're First Nations, or that they have concerns about letting the school know because then they're worried how their child will be treated as the only First Nations kid in the school.
And I want you to talk to me a little bit about that, you know, because I know that in this work, like, let's, you know, be clear about this. The work that we do is in the prevention of childhood sexual abuse. And we know that First Nations children are highly overrepresented in the statistics. And I also know that, you know, when the rest of the team go into spaces where there are Aboriginal families, there's very much a mindset of, you know, your white fellas, and there's a distance. I want you to talk to me about how you navigate those spaces, because I think that the work that you're doing is so super powerful and really important for people to understand.
Yeah, and to be really clear, we can understand that Aboriginal children are more likely to be victims just as much as we can understand the reasons behind that, and the fact that, because I've been asked by non-First Nations people before but that's just because child sexual abuse is an accepted practice in Aboriginal communities, right? And to be really clear, these are from people who have probably, they've coded me as not an Aboriginal person, right, because for whatever reason they've missed me saying that, or they've just not clocked it, or whatever it is. And that person isn't coming necessarily from malice, they're coming from ignorance, and they're coming from a lack of understanding of history.
But this is the mythology that we face in every space. We know that there are certain demographics of children who are at greater risk, children with a disability, children who are living in out-of-home care, and First Nations children. And I think a lot of the work that we do is unpacking the systemic reasons why particular children are more vulnerable. But I really want to hear about how you do that, because it's one thing for me to be a white fellow and talk about that, and it's another for you.
Yeah, and even when I'm going into like predominantly First Nation spaces, like I make it really clear that I'm mob going in to talk to mob. And when I do that, I want to make it really clear so that, let's say if it's a parent setting, that all the parents know that there's mob coming to speak. And the reason that's important is because there's an understanding of, I'm not from child protection, or I'm not from, I understand a history of child removal, and I understand a history of colonisation, and I understand why our community is viewed as, all the negatives that it is, but they know instantly that I don't view it that way. That there is going to be a safer space where people can ask the hard questions. They can, be vulnerable in there's a problem and I don't know how to solve it, or there's a behaviour I want to talk about, or I want to protect my young people, but I don't want to have the fear that, as a First Nations person, if I say I'm worried about this, that I'm going to go, oh, you should be worried about that, and actually I'm going to take your kids then. Because that's the safest thing for us to do.
Yeah. I'm not saying anything because I just don't know how we navigate that. Like you're talking, and I know we talk about this all the time, but you're talking and I'm listening, and I don't know when this, country has, people in power in this country have such a huge history of child removal for no reason, really. And we know to this day that First Nations children are removed from homes where, if they were white families,
they wouldn't be.
The family would be offered services, support services. So we know that, we know that racism is still really inherent in our system. So I'm like, you are one person, Lauren. What do we do?
Well, yeah. What do we do? No, I think, to be really clear, when we talk about what do we do, I personally, here at Body Safety Australia, I'm really trying to build a First Nations team here, because I know there's one of me and there's so much more work than I could ever possibly do myself. And I'm also aware that I'm not the only, Aboriginal person, First Nations person who wants to do this work, who is passionate about this work and capable of doing this work. Totally. If anyone is listening and wants to reach out. But to do that, to create a space where we really have a First Nations team, a space to do this work fully, that means BSA, our team, our organisation here, has to be culturally safe for them.
Okay, so you talked about this at the start. You talked about how you were working in hospitality and you were called exotic, which I'm still struggling with. Mm-hmm. And you were working in very white middle class neighborhoods, and coming here you really set an intention that you wanted to work in a space that was culturally safe. I'm not Aboriginal. I don't believe that when you landed in our organisation, we were culturally safe. I think that we had really, really good intentions.
Yes.
And I think that we had an understanding of what needed to be happening in many, many different perspectives, you know, not just culturally safe for First Nations people, but for queer folk, for, you know, like refugee, etc. But I want you to talk me through the journey that you and I have been on together.
Yeah, and I think I would agree that when I started here, because I've been here for, I don't know, 5-6 years. Yep. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute. And we were small. There were like 4 of us.
That's right. Yep.
So what an organisation, culturally safe space at 4 people versus 20, like they're the 2 very different things. But I think what has always been there is an honesty of what was not known. And I think what was really valuable was a space where I could come in and go, oh, okay, this is important to me, or this is or you know, even something as simple, I say simple, but what often will first come up is January 26th.
Yeah.
And this thing of, okay, I'm in an organisation where I can honestly talk about my feelings of that and what I need in that space, and, you know, what that looks like just in the fact that we're in schools and people are talking about it, and having a space where we didn't necessarily have all the answers in that first year, second year, or, you know, what that looked like. But there was an honesty from you and from others of going, what do you need and what can we do? And like a real ability to not overstep into well, I think this is going to work, or I think this would be appropriate, of always creating a space for me to go, actually, this is my thoughts, this is what I think, this is where I'm sitting with it.
Which is like great to hear that that's been meaningful for you, but I always sit in a space of going, but then I'm asking you for the labour, right? Like, you are the only Aboriginal person in the organisation, and now I'm asking you to tell me what to do about the fact that, like, my ancestors colonised your country.
Yeah. What an awkward dinner table conversation that is.
Yet somehow not.
Yeah,
right?
Which is funny because it never has been. Yeah. And I think I'm not going to pretend that there hasn't been the times where, it's a double-edged kind of moment, because I value that opportunity to have my voice heard so much. But there are times where I have, you know, reflected of, even posts, like even sometimes in the moment you don't realise it, and you get asked and you talk and you give something, and then later you go, oh yeah, that was a lot of emotional labour that I just gave, or that was a lot of, you know, information that I gave, when now I sometimes have that reflection of, but I'm not speaking for all First Nations people. I'm speaking just for me. And now, you know, as we grow and as we get bigger, you know, we're setting things that are going to be bigger than just me. It's, you know, then I get really reflective of, am I doing it right? Which is really hilarious, because even for that, you know, it's about me, it's about my mob, but I'm looking at this from an organisational perspective at times going, I don't know if I'm doing it right either.
Yeah, right. That's a lot to carry.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've learned is that in the start we really did things on the fly. So, you know, January 26th is coming up. Oh, look, it's January 20. Oh, Lauren, what do you want us to do, right? And you know, what I was asking of you was labour when you were already sitting in a place of heightened emotion. And I see this a lot in schools as well, and I see it on social media, right? All the education pages, they're like, oh, it's, you know, Australia Day coming up, like, what activities have you got? And then other people will go in and go, no, you don't do that because it's Invasion Day, and then there's this big fight. And of course the people who are hurt in that are the people whose land we're on. So I think one of the things that I have learnt, and, you know, if we're thinking about giving advice to people in spaces of education, is approach this at a time when it's
not as painful.
Yeah, right.
Because it's, you know, we always have these conversations of January just sucks.
Yeah.
Like as a month. Because as soon as the 1st of January hits, mobs waiting, where because as the weeks go on, we get asked what our thoughts are, how we're feeling, what our plans are. We're also, are you going to the rally? Are you doing this? Are you and so the whole of January becomes tense.
Yeah.
And so it is that thing of how do we forward plan so that when it is the time of tension is not when we then have to make all of the decisions.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot, it's heaviness, and then I think because of the tension then you'd have the extra worry of I don't know if that was right or if I was just coming from a place of tension or pain or trauma or history, or just I was sitting in such a space of sorrow that this was my reaction, which wouldn't necessarily have been my reaction if we had done this in November.
Yeah. Big learning for me. What else? What else have we done right? What else have we done wrong?
Yeah, the good and the bad and the learnings can be really close together. So BSA sent me to the Aboriginal Early Childhood Conference, which was incredible.
Yeah.
And it was 2 days of learning and connecting and reflecting, and just it was an incredible opportunity and experience that I was given, and intentionally I was given it because it would be so much more meaningful, impactful for me to go and do that.
Yeah.
And that was an incredible, great thing. And then I came back from it and I presented, it was an internal day and that sort of a thing. And
you shared.
And I shared, and I had gotten this trivia game thing, which was all about First Nations trivia. And it's like, to be clear, it's pretty heavy as a trivia game. It's not your pub trivia.
Right.
And I picked out a few bits, and we decided for this point when we were talking about it that I would go through the trivia. And what that actually turned into was a moment in time of me as the First Nations person asking questions of white people, predominantly, to reflect on the fact that most people didn't know very much, which was fine. What then happened was there was very big emotional reactions from everyone else around that.
Yep.
And so what ended up happening is I had to hold the safe space and the it's okay and the don't be so upset, like that.
It's not your job.
No, but obviously we're talking about trivia that talks about the fact that these are all the languages that have been lost, and these are all that I obviously so personally relate to. And yet in that moment it was, I have to now be the strong stone for everyone else, because actually this information was too hard for everyone else in the room to hear.
Yeah, right.
And so it had to be now a moment of support for the white people in the room from the black person in the room.
Yeah, which is not your job.
No.
I'm sorry to hear that. I think this is something that I'm really conscious of this year, because, we're having the vote to Parliament, and we know from experience that whenever a group of people's human rights or dignity are being put out to a public vote, we saw this with the marriage equality campaign, we get this big increase in hate.
Yeah.
And that's just actually how things are working these days. So I am really conscious now this year and aware that there is very, very likely going to be a really big increase in racism in Australia, particularly towards First Nations people. So I'm sitting in a space of going, what can we as an organisation do, and what can we do better, and how can we protect you, and how can we protect all of the children that we work with who are going to be impacted by, some of the vitriol that we will inevitably see.
Yeah, because we know there's going to be very large, loud campaigns on both sides, and in all of those spaces, and there's going to be great points and not great points, and there's going to be racism and all of those things sandwiched in. And we know that the young people that are going to be coming to school are going to be having people talking about them to them with no space for safety or consideration or feelings. And, we are going to be debated like...
Yeah, your very rights are going to be debated like it's a dinner party conversation, right?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, you shouldn't talk about the referendum at dinner, and it should be something that is discussed. However, the way that it is often discussed and talked about and around, and this continual, I myself have been in that space where I'm surrounded already by media of it, and I notice myself and others where we, you retract a bit. There is a level of self-protection that is involved to get through this year.
Yeah.
That all mob are going to have to put in place, because even if you are campaigning loudly, even if you are right there is a layer you have to put around yourself so that every little conversation and moment is not chipping away at you.
Yeah. So, what I know from previous experience is that when you know that something's coming, when you know that harm is coming, you have to become a vocal advocate for safety, and that means coming out, as anti-racist, like really looking at the systemic things where racism exists, really examining people's questions that aren't coming from a place of curiosity, but are coming from a place of kind of being vexatious, right?
Yeah.
Even if you get it wrong, you have to be an ally, you have to speak up, you have to stand up and take some of the heat, even if you get it wrong.
Yeah, I think there's often this idea, particularly for, white people, that if I don't know everything, if I don't have an Aboriginal person next to me at the time, I can't do this work. I can't advocate. I can't speak. I can't try and make things better, because if I get it wrong, that's worse than if I did nothing at all. And to be really clear, it is not worse. Doing nothing, apathy, that idea of just it never being discussed is not better. Because even when you get it wrong, like one of my clearest memories of year 10 was of a teacher who got it very wrong, and yet I don't look at it as the most terrible thing. And I say that because it was a history teacher who we were talking about stolen generation, and the positive was that was my only memory of talking about stolen generation at school, was this one class, one time in year 10. And I mean, I could tell you all the explorers because we did that a lot, but literally the only class. Now, that was a great moment of, this was actually being talked about. My family was being talked about. Yeah. Oh, okay, that was great. When the teacher found out, and when I was talking to a close friend in the class about, so this is what my family's been through, and the teacher overheard that, and the teacher said, oh, amazing, Lauren. Actually, Lauren, can you stand up and can you now tell the class about your family's connection to the stolen generation? Like, that was not a safe thing to do. No. It was not a good thing. It was not a safe thing. And that teacher did not get it right. Yeah. But if that lesson had never happened, if we had just never touched on the hard thing and we had just never done it, that wouldn't have been better.
Yeah, because it would just continue the erasure.
Exactly. So if you're looking at a topic or a conversation, or you want to talk about the referendum but you don't actually know if you're going to get it right, I use quotations because right is vague. Yeah. Trying is still important.
Okay. So what does that look like in schools? Like, I know for our organisation, the work that we do, if there's a Koori kindergarten, we try to make sure that you support that community rather than somebody else, because that's as right as we can get it, right? But you're not always available, so sometimes it will be, one of the other educators who have been trained by you to work in communities. So that's less right, but still...
But better.
Better.
Yeah.
Okay. So for teachers, and I'm particularly talking about teachers in school, because actually we see early childhood education doing a lot more in this space than school education.
Yeah. It's been a focus in early childhood a lot longer than it has been in primary and secondary school spaces. And I think there's almost, at times as well, there's a freedom of outside curriculum necessarily that allows more space, or even just the perception that there is more space that can be filled with First Nations culture and knowledge and learning and art and all of the great things. And I think that's really I think educators have found that easier to do in early childhood than in other spaces.
Yeah, but we see it being done really differently in different spaces, right? So we see some tokenistic work in early childhood. You know, let's run up a flag and we've ticked that box. And we see other people doing really, really deep work where they have ongoing connections with local elders who come in and do yarning circles with them. And, you know, so what I want to ask, though, is for teachers who are just starting on this journey, maybe the schools aren't on board, maybe they don't have connections with elders or with, you know, Aboriginal community organisations, but they want to do anti-racist work this year. Yeah. What do you suggest?
I think there is that assumption that it's all or nothing. It's we get all the elders in and we do all this stuff and it all has to happen or nothing can happen. And that's
a lot of pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. And as much as I hate the word journey, it is a lifetime of steps. And if you want to get to a place where you're involving elders, of course you can do that. That also does not involve a phone call. That involves going and building a connection and making time and space to connect with elders, not actually, you know, not coming from a very Western lens of, I need an elder, you're an elder, come in and give us the information. Yeah. Of a kind of, you know, I'm going to give you this and you give us this. Like, it's not that relationship. You have to do relationship building. And when you think about that idea, relationship building with elders is one way to do that work. When you think about relationship building with country, there's ways to do that work in just your environment, in your space, without an elder present. Getting one is great eventually, but right now, let's say we're starting at ground zero. Yeah. What is that relationship with country that your school, your centre, your classroom is making? When you think about the relationship you're building with families and the students about First Nations culture and work, you know, the reminder is also always assume that you have First Nations children in front of you.
Exactly.
Because you won't know. I get told a lot that, but we don't have any, which is a hilarious idea in and of itself, because you won't always know. You will not necessarily always be clocked as someone who is safe to know.
Yep.
And therefore you do not. You know, I've had the thing where I've been teaching at a school and I've spoken to the parents and I've been really clear of my mob and who I am with the parents. And then I went into the class and I had a student run up to me and go, oh, my mum said you're mob too, and like us. And the teacher had not had a conversation with the student about that, did not know, but the parent let the child know, Lauren's going to your school today and Lauren's Aboriginal like us. Yeah. And you can go and talk to Lauren about that. Yeah. So you have to have that understanding of you always have, we're everywhere. We're always there. We're always in front of you.
Whether we tick the box or not, right?
Exactly.
And I think, and I know we're on time, but I think one of the things that you taught me, you know, when we're talking about whether we've ticked the box or not, for a lot of First Nations people, there's almost kind of an imposter syndrome about ticking the box because they are stolen generation or descendants of stolen generation and can't prove.
Yeah, there's lost history.
Yeah.
And I think this is that other thing of if you want to do the relationship building, you've got to do research and education and learning on your own before not going to a First Nations person and asking them to teach you.
Yeah.
Because firstly, they might not know, and it's really disempowering when a white person comes up to me and goes, what's your totem?
Yeah, right.
One, don't ask anyone that. Don't. But also, you're asking me something and there's an assumption that I'm going to have that knowledge.
Yeah.
If I then have to tell you I don't have a totem, then the response is, what? Why not? But Aboriginal people have totems, and I've learnt that totems mean this, and so why don't you have a totem? And then I have to go, cool, so the reason I don't have that is because our family was intentionally displaced from our history, and we have spent the last 2 generations trying to gain any of that knowledge back.
And actually, it's none of your business.
Yeah, and also my totem's none of your business. Are we getting married? No, that's why you ask for someone's totem. But also it is that thing of then I have a reflection of, well, now I don't feel Aboriginal enough because I don't have these little pieces of knowledge that you as a white person want to have. That you're not necessarily interested in hearing about the knowledge I do have or the understandings I do have, because I can't give you the little nuggets of whatever you want.
Yeah.
So the other sort of side of that is that often I can be asked for my certificate of Aboriginality.
And Lauren, you taught me about this. I had no idea and I was horrified.
Yeah, because it's horrifying. It's a colonised weapon used to keep First Nations people from culture, community and support, basically. And so what this practice is that the government can give you a certificate of Aboriginality, which is you having to prove that you are Aboriginal. Now, to do that, you have to get that piece of paper, basically, in front of elders of the community, and they have to sign you off as being Aboriginal. Now, like, some people might be listening going, cool, but if you're an Aboriginal person part of community, like, that seems really easy. Haha.
Right, but you're telling me that you have never been to your lands.
Exactly. And so, to be really clear, our family has spent a very long time looking at this process. Now, I grew up in Darwin. All my connection to mob is in Darwin. Elders are in Darwin. All of this connection is Larrakia mob. I cannot get my certificate signed by any Larrakia elder. They have to be signed by a Kurrajari elder. I've not met a Kurrajari elder yet. I would love to, but I haven't, because that also is going to mean I'm going to have to go and, I don't know, live in Broome for a while, or like constantly go back over a period of years to develop the kind of relationships that are needed for an elder to sign off that piece of paper.
Yeah.
Because, like, an elder's not going to just sign me off because I go up there and go, this is who I am, because they don't know me, which is fair. But the elders that do know me cannot sign that piece of paper off.
Yeah.
Because they're not my mob. And so it becomes this conundrum of, oh, well, you're Aboriginal, but you can't prove it on this piece of paper. So, there have been times where you go to, I remember there's this weird amount of fear when you are doing a form or filling something out or telling someone that who you are, and you wait for well, can you prove it though?
Yeah, right.
Which is insane, because I can prove where we were taken from, and I can prove the mission that, my great-grandmother ended up on, and I can prove these sort of things. I can prove the name change that they gave her, but I can't then prove that all of that is because we're Aboriginal. Wow.
That's intense.
Yeah. It's heavy. And what it means for a lot of people is that, as I said at the beginning, this is not a unique experience. And so many First Nations people.
But Lauren, what does that certificate do? Like, why do you need a certificate of Aboriginality?
Well, it's really funny because for example, my uncle is a very established Aboriginal graphic designer. Mm-hmm. And he works with a lot of large organisations, and some of them have turned around after 20 years of working with him and have gone, oh, well, we're doing this reconciliation plan, or we're doing this sort of stuff, and we're needing to prove the Aboriginal people we're working with, we need your certificate of Aboriginality to prove that you're an Aboriginal person doing this work, to tick off the box that we have this many Aboriginal people we work with.
I don't know, Lauren, I was born in apartheid South Africa, and when you talk about this, and when you talk about people having to prove their racial lineage, it just actually makes me feel sick.
Yeah, and I think people think this was ages ago, but when I was moving from Darwin to Melbourne and I needed to go on Centrelink to fund, a part of me being at uni, I was at uni getting asked, so like, you're Aboriginal, so like, how much extra money do you get from the government? And I then ended up in many of a heated conversation about the fact that I don't, because I don't have this certificate, so I cannot prove that I'm Aboriginal, therefore I cannot actually claim that in the way that you might think I could.
Right. But of course, if you could, you would get 2 houses, 3 cars.
I'd get a boat, I'd get a mansion, I'd get anything I wanted. Obviously not, but there's that assumption, and it's a thing I've seen less. But my sister, there was a job that she wanted to go for, and it was like Aboriginal people are welcome to apply, provide your Aboriginality certificate. and I had this call from my sister being like, I want to do this thing, but we don't have that. I'm like, do I just write a letter to explain why I don't have that? And I was kind of sitting in this place of, if you have to write a letter explaining why that process is racist, I don't know if that's the best place for you to be.
Yeah.
But that is going to exclude a lot of places.
So I guess that brings me to my next question. You know, you started with us when we were 4 people. You were one of 4 people, right? And we have grown, but we're still a small organisation. We're a charity. And yet this question of reconciliation action plan comes up, and we have this conversation over and over again. And I have particular feelings, because in the same way that I have feelings about organisations that get a rainbow tick and yet maybe are or maybe are not safe for LGBTIQA plus people. What are your feelings?
Oh, many and complicated and convoluted. I agree. I think reconciliation plans, like all things, can have great intentions and can be great spaces for people to be tokenistic and box ticking, and we're a safe organisation because we have a reconciliation plan, not because we're actually a culturally safe organisation. I think the two are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, when we think about reconciliation, like, that needs to look so specific and personal to each organisation that is doing it. And I think when I think about us as a small non-for-profit running on the fumes of a rag or something, kind of space, what it would look like for us to deeply do reconciliation work is quite different than a large bank or somewhere else. I think that there is amazing opportunities for us to do things to deepen that more than that we do. But I also think there's recognition of the work that we do already, and that we're not starting from nothing, and that it's not like we're a space that's doing all this harm that needs to now undo all of this harm. I think we actually have to take it from that personalised lens of, how do we just continually enrich the safety of the space that we've cultivated?
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to be clear, I don't think that every organisation that undertakes a reconciliation action plan or a rainbow tick is doing it from a tokenistic perspective. But I'm asking, as we do this, as many organisations do, how do we make it as meaningful as possible as we start on this journey?
Yeah.
How do we do this in a way that we can, have outcomes that are rich and are genuine and really will support not just you, but anyone that joins our team who's a First Nations person?
Yeah, the future First Nations team of Body Safety Australia, that will be amazingly funded by somewhere and will be incredible for the people we get from somewhere. And if you're one of those people, again,
absolutely,
call me.
Absolutely, give Lauren a call. We would love to hear from you if you have a background in I can't even finish that.
If you're an amazing person who thinks you'd be amazing here, reach out, because I think there's this, even that, like, when I tell people I want to have a First Nations team here, it's always met with this, that's amazing, but moment. And I feel often the but is, but like, if you, and it's the same thing when you talk about anything, if you make a First Nations team, but you're kind of excluding other people that might be great for the job because they're not First Nations. And I'm like, well, that's a huge assumption, because you're basically saying you don't think First Nations people would be the best person for the job. Right. And if I'm talking about a team that's whole purpose is designed for the safety of First Nations children and communities and engagement, how could you ever tell me that First Nations people are not going to be the best person for that job?
Absolutely. And I think the other assumption that comes up is that if you build a First Nations team, they can only work in First Nations communities.
Yeah.
Which kind of blows my mind, right? Because they're the best people for the job to work in all of the communities
exactly
that we work in.
And one of my favourite things, and I had this, I'll tell this very short story, which is I was teaching like a respect relationships kind of class, and I was teaching a specific one of our programs called Over the Rainbow, which is around LGBTQI plus equity and inclusivity. And, I was coming from a bisexual person space, not like I always have my First Nations cap on, but it wasn't turned all the way around. It was, part of it. And I had this student in the room and we were talking about, different definitions of sexualities and identities. And we were just talking about all this stuff. And then the students had a moment to talk amongst themselves. And I was walking around and I just had this student lean over and go, so like, you Aboriginal? And I was like, yeah. Because in my brain, I'm waiting for you're bi, you're this, like I'm waiting for that. But I get that. And I was like, yeah. And she just went, so am I. And I went, amazing. Nice to meet you. And it was this just little moment of connection of I see you, you see me. Yeah. We don't have to talk. I'm not here to talk about it. We're not talking about culture. We're not talking about any of this stuff. But there was just this
trust, right?
Yeah. There was this instant, like that student could just breathe that tiny bit easier, as could I in the moment, because there's just this you're not on your little island anymore.
Yep.
Someone else is there with you. We've gone so deep and yet there is so much more to talk about. And I don't think, we will need many future episodes around the things we haven't been able to talk about today, like, decolonising the space and what that looks like, not only in education, but in safety, in how we talk about this work with community. So I want to just flag that if you have specific questions around decolonising this work, if you go to our Instagram, which is @bodysafetyau, and follow the link in the bio, you'll be able to find our anonymous question box. Please put in any questions there and we will use them for future episodes.
Awesome. Thank you for talking all things reconciliation and, and really being so vulnerable and honest with us this afternoon about your experience at Body Safety Australia and your experience doing this work in all the types of communities that we work in.
And thank you, Deanne, for sitting in discomfort in this conversation and to show other educators and parents and just people that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to get it right all the time, but your continued ability to try and to make space for me and my voice and others, and to always be a person who I can openly come and talk to and ask and bring stuff up to is invaluable. So thank you for doing that here with me today and kind of doing it always.
You're welcome. It's a little love fest.
I know. But thank you everyone for listening. I hope this has made the hard chat slightly easier. But I'm Lauren French.
And I'm Deanne Carson.
And don't forget, the kids are okay. Thanks for joining us this week and making space for these hard chats. Thanks to our amazing podcast producer, Jade Jones, our podcast editor, Sam Carson, and our incredible composer of this music and all music you'll hear, Jade Perry. If you want us to answer your question box questions, head to our Instagram @Body Safety Australia and follow the link in our bio.